Hwijae's childhood is a nightmare, spent as a guinea pig for a ruthless crime syndicate. Rescued by brave hunters who battle monstrous creatures from otherworldly dungeons, the talented boy is taken in by Korea's most powerful hunter. Now as an adult, Woo manages a team of hunters in his adoptive father's agency. Despite his job in a chaotic industry, he has longed for a peaceful life. Unfortunately, a global catastrophe leads to the demise of his world. Alone and heartbroken after losing everything, Woo discovers a mysterious device that sends him back in time. Having knowledge of the future, he becomes humanity's last hope, racing to prevent the apocalypse. Humanity's sole survivor narrowly escaped. With the fate of the world resting on his shoulders, Woo decides to use his unique experience to save mankind. In the dead of night, a research facility is infiltrated by people known as the Hunters. Two scientists alert their boss that the Hunters have broken in. Seeing a group of children behind a see-through window, a hunter lady announces the children's imprisonment. The glass window is promptly shattered by a powerful fist, freeing the children. A muscular man grins broadly at the kids and inquires if they are all right. He declares their newfound freedom, while his team deliberates their next course of action. Taking a frail boy with black hair into his arms, he questions if the boy is injured. The kid clings to him tightly, watching the scientist being harshly subdued. The boy casts an ominous glare at the once arrogant chief researcher, now begging for his life while being pinned to the floor by a hunter. As the hunters guide the other children, the man inquires about the boy's name. The boy, scheming to provoke the hunter, replies that he is called Number 12. Upon hearing this, Hunter Hong Seok-young grimaces in disappointment. He gently sets the innocent boy down and turns to unleash his fury on the chief researcher, cursing vehemently as he kicks him repeatedly in the flank. Grabbing the researcher by the collar, Hong delivers a punch that knocks the scientist's teeth out, rendering him unconscious. They say violence is not always the solution, but this time, it is safe to disagree. A loud shout calls out to Hong. He turns to innocently ask the inspector, the lady behind him, what brings her to him. Out of breath and pale-faced, she witnesses Hong's brutal assault and orders him to cease immediately. As Hong releases the nearly lifeless body to the floor, the inspector thanks him for his assistance, but expresses concern over his actions. With innocent eyes, Number 12 inquires if the inspector is Hong's boss. She elegantly bows and explains that her role is merely to keep him in check. Mischievously, Number 12 remarks that this is precisely the job of a boss and reveals the lab chief's abusive behavior towards the lab members and children. Hearing this, the two hunters immediately stare daggers at the unconscious chief researcher lying beaten up on the floor. Number 12 comments that the lady looks weak for a hunter. At least he is honest. Taking no offense, she affirms her weakness with a smile, telling him that he should not judge someone simply by appearances, especially not a woman. She adds that many ways exist to punish someone like Hong that don't require raw strength, making Number 12 curious about the methods. While patting the cute boy's head, she advises him to study hard for the national exam, and then work his way up the corporate hierarchy. Number 12 gazes at her in awe, contemplating the difference between the raw power of a hunter and the influence wielded by those who control them. Thus, 19 years pass. On the last day of May 2044, a towering skyscraper belonging to the Ability Management Agency in Seoul's Jeong District comes into view. During a meeting inside the agency, a young man announces that 2 dungeons have escalated to threat level 2. He expresses frustration at the indifferent attitude of the hunters in the meeting. With strong disdain, he urges them to listen carefully, emphasizing that even B and C rank dungeons pose significant instability at higher threat levels. He insists they remain alert to avoid going into missions unprepared, and assigns Team 2 to handle the B2 rank dungeon. Without complaints, a woman agrees and suggests that Team 1 tackle the C rank dungeon, since Teams 3 and 4 are recovering from their previous dungeon dive. She proposes leaving the remaining dungeon to another guild. Thus, concluding the meeting, the man checks his laptop and confirms that the equipment is ready. Nonetheless, he advises Team 2's leader to verify everything before entering the dungeon. After asking if there are any questions, he tells everyone to grab lunch and tells Team 2 to remain on standby. Everyone else leaves eagerly looking forward to lunch, except the woman with the stern expression, Hunter Yoo Hyeun. Concerned, she asks why the man did not mention the dungeon she previously mentioned. Recalling the Bonji Dong D6 rank dungeon, he explains that raids are only dispatched when dungeons reach threat level 2. Yoo Hyeun mentions having a bad premonition about it. Sighing, the man dismisses her concern, arguing that closing dungeons based on feelings would undermine the agency's credibility. He advises her not to misuse her privileges as an S-rank hunter. Annoyed by his attitude, she accuses him of benefiting from nepotism, like a nepo baby. He retorts that he is the most competent beneficiary of nepotism she will ever find. Yoo Hyeun reluctantly reminds him that he would be fired without his skills and reliability, and adds if a civil servant gets attacked by a hunter, it would end his career. Strictly glaring at him, she repeats her bad premonition. Meanwhile, the man cheerfully announces that business hours are over and asks her not to contact him. Adding insult to injury, he sarcastically remarks that she can't contact him from inside a dungeon anyway. Furious, she yells at Hwijae. 2 days pass, and the scene shifts to a beach in Busan. A girl is heard excitedly talking about a popular watch she saw in the news. Sitting at a table, Woo tells the 2 girls across from him that his watch is a masterpiece, with only 2 existing worldwide. He mentions that it is still being tested, causing the 2 to fawn over him like fangirls. Asked if he is a hunter, he responds that he has a license, but isn't an active hunter. He elaborates that he manages hunters at the agency. It makes their jobs easier. Woo also brags about his close relationship with the director, impressing the blonde girl. Excited, she praises the national hunter celebrity Hong Seok-yeon. Woo casually states that the director is his father. The other girl, surprised, asks about Woo's father. He reveals that he was adopted by the director. Suddenly, he looks down, lamenting the accident that took his parents' lives. He recalls how the agency director saved him by adopting him. During the conversation, deep thoughts run through Woo's mind about how hard he worked to repay his debt to Seok-yeon. He then lightens the mood with a laugh, asking the girls not to see him as a nepotism abuser, since his father is a fair man. While the girls blush over his fortunate situation, Woo internally despises himself for lying to them, fully aware that he isn't very innocent. In fact, he is unfairly using his hunter's license at this very moment. The black-haired girl inquires about his reason for being there, and he explains that he is on vacation, celebrating his promotion. Woo jokes about being reluctantly forced to take the day off. The charming girl advises him that being a workaholic isn't healthy, mentioning that she is also on vacation. With a cheeky sigh, Woo playfully asks if he is disturbing the girls on their precious day off, but they continue flirting, thanking him for showing them the cool watch. Upon their insistence, Woo shows them the watch again. He reveals that due to its long scientific name, the agency simply calls it a manhwa watch. Curiously hunching over, the girls ask if it has any special functions. Woo gladly explains that only the owner can use the watch since it detects their mana patterns. He activates it, displaying an impressive holographic projection, showing multiple dungeons and their ranks. Something catches their eye. The threat level of the dungeon they saw in the news is quickly rising. Suddenly, a warning siren goes off, indicating that the rank of the Seoul Banji-dong dungeon is now unmeasurable. Distressed, the blonde girl checks the news on her phone and is shocked to read the term dungeon destruction. Woo remains calm amidst the panic, immediately calling the agency to confirm the situation. He notes that although it is a D-ranked dungeon, the nearby population density is high. However, he receives shocking news that it isn't just a D rank. Cold sweat pours down his cheek as he learns that half a district was annihilated upon the dungeon break. The operator informs him that standby hunters and the director have been dispatched. Woo reassures them and orders a helicopter, while the distressed operator begs him to hurry over. Now flying the helicopter, Woo is in disbelief, hoping the director resolves the problem before his arrival. He is confused as to why his watch is alarming him. Profusely sweating, the pilot inquires if the hordes of horrific creatures below them are monsters. Woo remains speechless while his watch continues to go off. All of a sudden, all the dungeons in Korea are destroyed. It was on the 2nd of June in 2044 when hell broke loose. The scene transitions to a desolate city as news spreads that dungeons worldwide have broken down and hunters, along with Hong Seok-yeon himself, have vanished. Flying above the ruins, Woo realizes returning to Busan isn't possible and decides to search for survivors before heading back to the agency. The man in black battles monster after monster, growing exhausted, as he tries to contact his father through the manhwa watch. The device indicates Hong Seok-yeon's vitals can't be detected, leaving Woo shocked. He wonders how South Korea's strongest hunter could have perished. Reflecting on his lifelong plan to live simply, Woo despairs over how much he has struggled to achieve this wish. He desperately hopes to find survivors to support his plan. Suddenly, he hears someone coughing and turns to see Yoo Hyeun, his precious aunt, gravely injured. Despite her condition, she reprimands Woo for calling her auntie. instead of Nuna like he used to, baffling Wu given her dire situation. A little respect never hurts man. She's kind of dying right now. When Wu inquires what happened to her, she mentions that some centipede monster is responsible. Hearing this, Wu immediately brings out an expensive antidote, which his aunt believes is ineffective. Refusing to give up, he applies the medicine to her wound. She repeats that her instinct was right, but Wu states that trusting a hunter's instincts is nearly always a bad idea. Yoo Hyeun tells her nephew she will die soon and hands him a dog tag. As Wu quietly stares at the silver medal in his hand, she explains it belonged to his father. The dying woman frustrates Wu by saying she is glad she could give him the tag, explaining that Seok-young's son has the right to keep it. Wu reluctantly claims he isn't the director's son, but Ji Hyeun counters that he is Seok-young's sole remaining family and advises him to give him a proper burial. Wu jokes in denial that he won't give his aunt a proper funeral if she dies, begging her again. However, she claims that pure luck allowed her to live this long. In her last moments, Yoo Hyeun recalls past memories, thinking back to when Wu was cute and called her his big sister, joking about how he's become an annoying brat. As Wu tries using more potions in denial, his aunt demands he stop whining and listen to her. As Wu mourns and pleads for her survival, she explains that her sword is nearby. Despite knowing he is only trained to use a spear like his father, she tells him it is a fine weapon for her nephew. Smiling at Wu in her final moments, Ji Hyeun expresses her final wish for him to survive. Closing her eyes, Wu wonders how he can survive in such a barren world and grabs his aunt's sword while venting his rage. He walks toward the centipede behemoth and is at a loss for words. He admits that hunting is the definition of danger, but cannot comprehend how a soul centipede could cost the lives of so many hunters. Walking among the corpses, he ponders his purpose after the strongest hunter has died, leaving only a dog tag behind. As he wonders if any people even survived, blue flames erupt from the sword. Furious, Wu begins cursing at the giant monster that took his aunt's life as he slices it with the flaming blue sword. Suddenly, the monster disappears, leaving Wu standing alone on the cracked ground. His eyes widened in shock at the corpse's sudden disintegration. Now, he stares at a small object emitting a golden beam into the sky. To his knowledge, monsters have never dropped items in history. He picks up the object, which begins verification of its owner. Various calculations are performed by the gadget, making Wu question if it's an artificial intelligence device. Finally, the gadget prompts Wu to set the date, leaving him confused. The device suddenly initiates a sequence automatically and requests permission to execute the command. Wu is at a loss as the device changes its question and continues to annoy him with the execution request. Frustrated in the madness, Wu shouts at the device, asking what it wants. However, he is interrupted by a warning from the device. So Wu wonders if it is another centipede monster, but discovers very soon how grave the warning actually is. The energy levels far exceed the centipede, allowing him to surmise that this entity is probably the one responsible for Korea's destruction. The device claims his chance of survival is 0. Paralyzed in terror, Wu tells it to execute whatever, as long as he can survive. The device begins identifying him as Wu stares silently, rattled by the four-eyed colossus not too far from him. The device repeats error messages for the emergency protocol. Still in shock, Wu wonders if he should run away, if at all possible. Just then, the device approves a final sequence and declares him eligible. Now completely hopeless, Wu gives up on escaping when the device gives him a possibility, as it declares that the world's destruction is fated. Wu madly shouts at it to save him. Surprisingly, the device immediately confirms him as the final survivor and initiates transport to an uncertain time. Wu regains consciousness as he is slapped repeatedly. Surrounded by people in uniforms, a blonde girl named Yoo Hyeun apologizes for slapping him. She informs him that his injuries have been treated by her, but advises him to avoid moving around. Wu gets up and looks around, befuddled by the peaceful atmosphere. He realizes the group is wearing old Hunter Academy uniforms. He notices an old computer and peeks at the calendar flipped to April 2024. A boy menacingly calls out to Wu, as his friend holding him back reveals his name. Wu recognizes Hyeun-wook, who states they don't have time for Wu to orient himself. As Hyeun-wook begins to lecture him, Wu rushes over to the window to look at the despairing scene below. He regrets having traveled to 2024, the year of the tragedy in which only 5 of the 46 people in the building survived. Looking out the window, Wu tries to comprehend his situation. He recalls the horrific state of Korea, his father and aunt's deaths, and the suspicious device that apparently transported him back in time. Woo is completely baffled by the time travel and remembers the paper he published on this scenario as an undergraduate. Before magic measurement devices existed, dungeons were manually managed. One ranked dungeon in particular appeared in the middle of Seoul. The guild managing it, not wanting to be outcompeted for the rare dungeon, falsely reported it as B rank. Due to unpredictability, the seemingly calm dungeon broke before the guild could take action. At that time, the high schoolers at Hunter Academy came to the civilians' rescue, despite being incapable of tackling a dungeon break. The result was 5 survivors, 2 of whom were hunters. This year was monumental in the establishment of Hunter Academies and related laws. Returning to the present, Woo realizes he can survive this situation with his aunt's sword. He asks the students how long it has been since the break, confusing them as they only learn about it today. Woo takes on a teaching role, repeating his question. A girl with long black hair, Park Yoo Hyeun, estimates around 4 hours, prompting Woo to stress the importance of exact figures. Hyeun confidently reports exactly 3 hours and 50 minutes. She also informs him that communication was lost 2 hours ago. With news that an attack team is arriving, Woo remembers the director's regret at letting students die while dealing with a boss monster. He vows not to let that repeat. With crude manners, Hyeun asks Woo to introduce himself and demands he show his hunter's license as a sign of trust. Of course, you can never trust someone who will save you from certain death. Woo simply remarks that he lost it, leaving the impolite student speechless. This exchange makes Woo realize he has no identification and cannot check the dungeon. He then proves himself as a hunter by summoning blue flames with his sword. The students discuss if they can be saved by this hunter. Meanwhile, Lee Se-young, the son of an international conglomerate owner, is relaxing, awaiting his protection team's arrival. When asked if he has a plan, Woo remembers Se-young's death was the vital motivating factor, leading to his family funding the establishment of various hunter academies and the agency. No, he can't let the boy die. Woo assures the students he has a plan, starting by going to City Hall. He speculates he can become a hero figure if he weakens Se-young's mana-concealing rune, and then saves him from certain death. However, an old professor disrupts the plan by pointing out the distance to City Hall. Woo recalls the man's shameless testimony of not respecting the young student's plan, the tragedies report. As the man continues his babbling, Woo silences him and asks the students if they would like to escape by themselves. Woo sarcastically taunts the old man and tells him he is free to stay stubborn and survive on his own. When Woo asks for a map, a woman with the old man offers to draw it. She takes a pen and paper, quickly recapping the situation. The students are shocked to hear that an S-rank Minotaur boss is so close to them. Woo quickly devises that since most of the buffaloes follow the boss, the ones on the road are probably strays. Taking the pen, Woo draws a circle and asks what it represents. Hyeun guesses that it is probably the outer part of the blockade to prevent the monsters from spreading. Woo confirms this, stating that as headquarters, the City Hall station is definitely safe. A man asks if they simply need to stay put, as the dungeon break ends with the boss's death. Woo elaborates that the Minotaur is a dictator, whose orders are absolute for the herd, especially regarding prey. But without a leader, the starving herd will simply feast on whoever is closest. After terrifying everyone, Woo asks if anyone objects. As expected, everyone responds with silence. Woo then asks if anyone can draw monster-repelling runes. 2 students take up the task, and Woo suggests they make no mistakes as the monsters sense mana well. The students wonder if the runes truly work, so Woo explains that they conceal the user's mana, except when they cast magic. Woo confirms if they know how to use runes and commands them to do so immediately. After he leaves, he sneakily alters the rune on Se-young to make his mana weaker, rather than concealing it entirely. Preparing to lunge out the window, Woo explains the plan one last time and promises to catch up with the students. Jumping multiple stories, he lands amidst the bull herd, joking that you should wear a red cape like a matador. This spectacle makes Seo Hyeun ask Hyeun who the mysterious hunter could be. A student, Choi Jin-woo, theorizes he is probably part of the dungeon raid. So Hyeun theorizes that he probably fainted on his way to the boss. Regardless, Hyeun remarks with humility that they have to trust him considering he risked his life for them. The old professor warns everyone to prepare to flee for their lives. The blonde boy notices Woo arriving, signaling them to start running. They see Woo circle the herd before a fiery blue slash eliminates them. Seeing this, the students begin their race to City Hall. Everyone takes positions as Woo orders, with Hyeun, the martial artist, taking the lead and mages shielding him. The civilians run as a group while Yoo Hyeun, a swordsman, and Hwijae with her healing magic cover their backs. Yoo Hyeun turns his head, terrified, as he notices the bull behind him ready to end his life. However, he suddenly sees it kicked away by the stranger, who shouts at him to flee. Seeing the man risk his life, Yoo Hyeun cries out to him, but with a heroic look in his eyes. Drowning in the herd of monsters, the last words Yoo Hyeun hears are the heroic hunter's orders to stop whining and get a move on. Meanwhile, Woo leaps onto the roof of a building to catch his breath. He ponders the origin of these relentless monsters, but acknowledges his role in summoning them all here. As the scene transitions, the truth behind the events unfolds. Woo intentionally smudges the rune on Yoo Hyeun's forehead, placing him in jeopardy. He then releases his mana to attract and gather the vile creatures. His plan involves rescuing Lee. At the moment, he faces imminent danger, crafting a sacrificial scenario that would cast him as a hero. A risky gamble, but the payoff might just be worth it. Although Woo's plan carries significant risk, its smooth execution and the absence of casualties leave him feeling quite relieved. After saving the students and others from the monsters, Woo contemplates his next steps. He muses over the implications of traveling back in time by 10 years, wondering if it might erase him from history, as depicted in some movies, or if his 10-year-old self still exists in this timeline. He then recalls the mysterious drop item and remembers it mentioning something about the world being destined for doom. Woo channels his mana into his mana watch, confirming that it still functions. As he operates the device, the reason for his arrival at this specific time becomes clear. It coincides with the emergence of the Banji Dong dungeon. This revelation suggests he has an opportunity to alter the world's fate and avert its doom. While Woo relaxes on the roof, he notices hunters fleeing from cow-headed monsters. Upon recognizing their faces, he identifies them as the hunters from Namsan, who had previously defeated the boss. Consequently, he decides there is no need to interfere in their battle. Among the hunters, Woo's eyes meet those of his foster father, Hong Seok-young, who is remarking on the monsters' stupidity for attacking their own subordinates, without recognizing them. The agency director sees this flaw as an advantage and instructs his team to bind the boss monster first. Woo feels a surge of excitement as he realizes that all the legendary Korean hunters have gathered here, and his rooftop vantage point is akin to a VIP spot. As an archmage employs an earth-based binding spell, Woo recalls that this unique magic belongs to Archmage Kim Chae-min, which was lost following her untimely death. Woo attempts to recall how the lady meets her end and resolves to save her when the time comes, recognizing that it could greatly aid in altering the world's fate. Considering that the Banji Dong dungeon's threat level remains significant for years, Woo believes that saving those destined to die, like the model school students, could ultimately lead to saving the world. He decides to first protect Seoul by dealing with the individual who will set him ablaze. Meanwhile, he daydreams about becoming famous as their savior, imagining a future where he ensures a comfortable retirement for himself after rescuing them from life and death scenarios. Meanwhile, the legendary Hunter team battles the Minotaur boss. Hunter Hong slashes its bound leg, followed by Kim's eliminating Vine's magic. As the monster bleeds, it becomes enraged, tearing a pillar from a building and smashing it onto the Hunter team, forcing them to scatter. A mage in the team urges Hong to sever the Minotaur's other leg to halt this rampage. Hong swiftly positions himself and attacks the beast, backed by Hunter Kim. Woo contemplates heading towards the city hall, but before he can leave, he gets caught up in the fight. Hong spots Woo atop the building and becomes concerned, but notices a weapon in his hand. Woo, in a challenging situation, uses his aunt's weapon to deliver the final blow to the Minotaur. The weapon incinerates the monster, making it look as though it was barbecued. Hong Seok-young and Kim are awestruck by Woo's immense power and inquire about his identity. Woo tries to evade their questions by claiming he is merely a trespasser, but there is no way Hong will let him leave so easily. The scene dissolves, revealing that Woo's sword has been confiscated and he is being interrogated. The police ask Hong if he truly wants to interrogate Woo alone. Given that Woo seems suspicious and has no social security number or fingerprint data, Hong assures the officer not to worry, as there is something he must discuss privately with Woo. Once the officer leaves, Hong begins his interrogation. Woo feels anxious seeing the young agency director again, but Hong reassures him that he only wants to talk and has turned off the camera. Hong introduces himself and requests Woo to do the same. Woo becomes lost in thought wondering if the agency director would save his younger self a year from now and adopt him. Woo snaps out of his thoughts and introduces himself as Woo Hwijae. Hong presents a torn piece of paper with a drawing on it and asks if Woo recognizes it. Reflexively, Woo replies that it is the same as the one on the laboratory wall. Hong smiles, indicating he expected this response and seems to have mistaken Woo for someone else. Hong reassures Woo to stay calm, explaining that it's merely a task. He mentions that they were concerned about Woo and that, had things gone according to their plan, they would have met him under better circumstances. Woo remains puzzled, given that Hong should not even recognize him. Despite Hong continuing his argument, Woo interrupts, expressing that he doesn't fully understand what Hong is saying. Hong explains that he is the teacher Kim must have mentioned, and expresses concern about Woo's safety, fearing that something might have happened to him. Woo then realizes that Hong has mistaken him for an insider from the Bonju, who was supposed to contact him, but met an untimely end along with Kim. Understanding the situation, Woo decides to go along with the misunderstanding. Hong informs him that they are prepared to assist with his escape and share the same target. He further explains that an identity has already been arranged for Woo. With everyone preoccupied with the Mi-on-dong incident, no one will notice a hunter appearing out of the blue. Woo considers himself fortunate, as this arrangement would obscure his unclear background. However, he remains cautious, knowing that Hong is not someone who trusts easily. Moreover, as Woo is also from Bonju and an insider, there is no risk of him being exposed. As Woo suspected, Hong informs him that he will be working under him for the time being, as he cannot allow Woo to wander about freely. Finding no viable alternative, Woo accepts Hong's proposal and shakes hands with him. A week passes and Woo appears increasingly displeased. When Hong inquires about his stay, Woo erupts in anger. He points to the tracker on his ankle and questions how he can be happy when he feels like a prisoner. Hong attempts to calm Woo, suggesting he focus on the positives, such as having managed to escape and being free now. Woo addresses Hong as Mr., but Hong requests to be called Uncle instead. Hong expresses gratitude for saving the 5 kids in Mi-on-dong, revealing they were his students. Woo accepts the praise with a proud smile. Hong then mentions he has been contemplating something. Woo hopes it is something positive, given that Hong's ideas often lead to troublesome outcomes. Hong acknowledges the skill level of his students and points out that it would have been very challenging to save only them, yet Woo managed to rescue the civilians as well. Considering this, along with his students' request to find Woo and repay him, Hong has given it some thought and now asks Woo to tutor them. Hong proposes that tutoring the students would allow Woo to blend in and could serve as a good cover. Woo confirms whether Hong really wants him to teach his students. After considering the offer, Woo realizes it might be a blessing in disguise. By forming strong connections with the students, Woo could potentially secure his future after saving the world. Woo decides to keep his thoughts to himself and asks Hong about the teaching arrangement. He points out that he cannot teach effectively since he is unable to use his mana, and therefore declines the proposal. Hong responds that he is not asking Woo to teach them about fighting, but rather about magic. He then inquires if the runes that conceal mana were created by Woo. Woo regrets asking too many questions, feeling irritated by the persistent inquiries they have prompted. Hong insists that Woo teach the students more about such runes, even if he did not create them. Woo had initially thought he would be teaching the students how to raid dungeons, but he then realizes that, given his status as an illegal awakener who recently escaped from a criminal organization, it would be suspicious for him to focus on that. Woo argues with Hong, claiming that runes aren't magic, and that he isn't suited to be a tutor. However, Hong insists that the knowledge would be beneficial for the students and help them save lives. At first, Woo considers finding a way out, but then decides to teach about runes, recognizing that this could save many hunters' lives and potentially bring him closer to his ultimate goal of saving the world and retiring afterward. A noble cause, if there ever was one. Or maybe he just wants a long vacation like my friend, who needs a 6-month vacation twice a year. Hong tells Woo that he has no choice in the matter, which irritates Woo, leading him to sign the contract. Hong assures Woo that he has handled the paperwork and adds that what he refers to as his school is essentially funded by his own money. Consequently, Woo will be listed as a guild member and will receive a monthly salary based on the minimum wage. Woo is shocked when he reviews the contract he signed and notices the pay. Infuriated, he exclaims that he has been scammed. 2 days later, Woo is riding in Hong's car, heading to meet his students. Hong compliments Woo's sword, noting that it seems to recognize its owner, and asks if Woo stole it. Woo explains that the sword belongs to someone close to him. Before his aunt died and gave him the sword, it was difficult to handle, but it has since changed. Hong asks Woo if he is upset with him for not returning the sword. In a cold voice, Woo replies that even if he were given the weapon back, he wouldn't be able to use it due to the tracker on his ankle, which also restricts his mana. Hong, who seems intent on irritating Woo, tells him to stop viewing everything negatively. As Woo observes his surroundings, he notices they are driving through fields. Given that he expected the school to be in an urban area, he questions Hong about whether they are heading in the right direction. Hong explains that the area is surrounded by dungeons, making it an ideal location for training hunters. When they arrive, Woo comments on how underdeveloped the place seems. Hong responds that this is just a temporary setup, with plans to construct buildings by next year, and welcomes Woo to his hunter high school. Hong introduces Woo to his students, instructing them to show respect, and informing them that Woo will be teaching them about runes. One student, named Yoo Hyeun, questions how Woo, who used a sword instead of magic, can teach about magic. Hong explains that one does not need to be a mage to use runes, and asks the students to refrain from objections, noting that it was difficult to persuade Woo to become their teacher. Another student inquires if they will only learn about mana hiding runes, to which Hong responds that they will also cover new runes. He advises the students to pay close attention to Woo's lectures, and not to slack off. The students immediately bombard Woo with questions, including whether Hong was hurt during the incident. They then express their concern to Hong, stating they have been worried about him all this time. Woo observes the students, finding them as innocent as ducklings, overly concerned about every small detail. He reflects on how they will change in the near future when they become seasoned hunters. He also recalls the harshness of the world and wonders if one of these students might be the hunter who was stabbed by a party member and died. As Woo's gaze meets Park's Yoo Hyeun, he notices her biting her nails and senses something unusual about her. He remembers that she was normal just a few days ago and ponders how she will evolve into the notorious witch, Park's Yoo Hyeun. Hong departs, and Woo's tutoring class begins. The students, after being taught, attempt to create runes themselves. Yoo Hyeun proves to be an expert, revealing that her grandfather taught her about these runes when she was very young. As she assists Woo, he suggests she take a break and let him draw the runes, noting that she might be tired. Yoo Hyeun bluffs, claiming she has more experience as a mage than he does. Later, it becomes evident that the rune Yoo Hyeun drew on Seung Yeon did not work, causing him to cry like a baby. Yoo Hyeun's failure triggers a memory of someone saying that her arrogance ruins everything, leading her to feel anxious and frustrated. In her frustration, Yoo Hyeun bites her thumb until it bleeds. The scene shifts to Park's Yoo Hyeun, standing in a large building with top-notch security. She emits a witch-like aura and appears as though she hasn't slept all night. A bulky officer approaches her and asks if she is waiting for Hong. At that moment, Woo bumps into Yoo Hyeun, telling her that he didn't bring her here just to talk. The officer gives Woo a suspicious look and questions his identity. Woo introduces himself as an aide from the Dungeon Raid Combined All Sources headquarters. He explains that his job is to support the agency director and assess the safety of all existing dungeons in South Korea. The officer appears confused by Woo's explanation, as Woo inadvertently provided details about his previous job. To cover up, Woo reassures the officer that he works in the agency director's office. The scene shifts to Woo having an audience with Hong in his office. Hong advises Woo not to complain about the inn, noting that he himself is staying there. Woo responds that he finds it preferable to living like a prisoner in a container. Hong then leaves Woo's room, wishing him a good night. As Hong leaves, Woo reflects on the importance of learning about technology in his youth as he disables the mana control device on his ankle. Using his mana, he operates his mana watch to look up stories related to Mr. Kim. He then searches for basic personal information about Park's Yoo Hyeun to understand what might have changed her personality. Woo comes across some peculiar details about Yoo Hyeun, including her aversion to compliments and the need to back off if she isn't smiling to protect herself. He also discovers additional information, mentioning the names Yoo Hyeun and Oh Hyeun can help calm her, and it is best to avoid mentioning Mi Yeon-dong in her presence. Woo wonders if the Mi Yeon-dong incident was responsible for Yoo Hyeun's personality change. Since he saved everyone and prevented any deaths, he thinks her personality shouldn't have changed this time. Frustrated by the lack of clues, he decides to go to sleep. The following morning, Woo is led to the riverbank by Hong, who then leaves him and vanishes. A student approaches Woo, only to find him lost in contemplation. Woo appears to be contemplating surrender, feeling that with 20 years ahead of him, he could afford to be complacent. However, the words of his aunt urging him to survive, echo in his mind. These words inspire him, providing the motivation he needs to persist and work tirelessly. The student continues to call out to Woo, until Woo's irritation causes him to snap out of his reverie. The student inquires about what has occupied Woo's thoughts so deeply. Woo asks if the student is Lee Seung-yeon, which pleases the student as it indicates that his teacher remembers his name. Lee then mentions Woo's sword, noting that his aunt had shown interest in it, given that she also wields one. When Woo asked about his aunt, Lee modestly refrains from boasting, but reveals that she is a highly renowned hunter. His aunt, Lee Mi-seon, is the youngest daughter of the chairman of the Daeyeon Group and serves as the guild master of the Daeyeon Guild. Beyond these accomplishments, she is also exceptionally powerful and skilled as a hunter. Woo recalls how much his aunt admires Lee and considers that staying close to the young man might secure him a bright future. Lee informs Woo that his aunt wishes to meet with him, but before he can elaborate further, Hong interrupts and calls Woo to a storage room. Annoyed by the interruption, Woo follows Hong into the room and asks why he was summoned. Hong explains that he has been preparing a class for Woo. He describes the room's current state, mentioning that it was once a storage area, and assuring Woo that he will tidy it up eventually. Woo sighs, recognizing that Hong's later will likely never arrive. Woo shifts the conversation and brings up Park Yoo-Hyeun, requesting that Hong address the matter. Hong seeks clarification, and Woo explains that she appears vastly different from when he last saw her in Myeon-dong. Hong dismisses this casually, attributing it to a change in her style. However, Woo is dissatisfied with Hong's response and hopes for a more empathetic approach to her situation. Despite Woo's attempts to make Hong understand, it seems futile as Hong struggles to grasp that people cannot simply rise after being knocked down. The scene fades out as Woo begins a lecture on runes. Hong Seok-young also joins the lecture, which greatly annoys Woo. Woo explains to the students the significance of runes, noting that they were once overlooked until an archmage from France discovered the mana hiding room, which shifted people's perceptions of them. He reflects on the future, where mana pens will make it possible for everyone to draw these runes, but in the current era, such runes are exclusive to mages. This realization leaves him somewhat puzzled, as he questions why the director would have non-mage students attend a class on something they cannot even utilize. Woo informs the students that their levels will be assessed, now that they have practiced extensively. He approaches Choi Jin-woo, instructing him to correct his mistakes after reviewing his runes. Woo then asks Jin-woo if he knows why runes were not used in the past. Jin-woo provides a partial answer, and Woo wonders if the question might be challenging for him, considering he has only recently awakened within the past year. Next, Woo approaches Park Yoo-Hyeun and poses the same question. Yoo-Hyeun responds in an eerie tone, prompting Woo to question why no one seems to find her demeanor unusual. Woo receives an explanation that it is because such responses tend to be quickly forgotten. He concurs, noting that this occurs when the mana in the air becomes distorted. He draws a rune and advises the students not to inquire about its underlying principles, as he, too, is not a mage. Woo instructs them to remember that the runes represent a combination of durability, correction, water resistance, amplification, and resonance. Yoo-Hyeun raises her hand, asking Woo why he had taught them the runes in Myeon-dong. Her question leads Woo to wonder if her current condition might be linked to the weakening of Lee Seung-yeon's runes. Since no one was harmed in that incident, Woo decides not to hold himself responsible. Yoo-Hyeun repeatedly draws the runes, anxiously seeking confirmation from Woo as tears well in her eyes. As the students continue practicing, Woo claps his hands to get their attention and tells them to take a break and have their lunch. Woo finds himself regretting following Hong as he eats a convenience store lunch in a container building. Hong approaches and asks Woo if he created the runes himself, noting Woo's extensive knowledge. Woo explains that someone he knew made them. Hong expresses admiration for Woo's knowledge, despite not being a mage. Woo grows increasingly suspicious of Hong and contemplates whether to share details about the inner workings of the Arc Research Center, as Hong seems unaware of it. He then inquires about how Hong is instructing the two magic students. Hong, with his mouth full, responds that he is sourcing various magic books for them. Hong mentions that Yoo-Hyeun possesses the magic her grandfather taught her, while Jin-woo, having only recently begun practicing, is struggling to master it. He asks Woo if he knows any magic experts who could teach the two students, but Woo declines, reminding Hong that he is not a mage. Woo then states that, despite not being a mage, he will teach the two students all the runes he knows. Hong is taken aback by this offer. Woo tells him not to be surprised and sets a condition. Hong must publicize all the runes he teaches when the time is right. Hong questions whether it is truly possible to publicize them, given that they were developed in the Ark, and asks if this is his only condition for teaching the students. Wu tells Hong that he must ensure to use his own publisher's name for any publicity. Although Wu initially intended to teach only a few runes to the students, their current dire state convinces him that it is impractical to leave them on their own. Hong expresses concern, asking if the mage who created the runes approved of him teaching them to others. Wu reassures Hong not to worry, explaining that the creator of the runes would be more than happy if even a single life could be saved through their use. He recalls the French mage who, despite the potential for personal gain, made the runes available for free with the intention of saving lives. While reflecting, Wu comes up with an additional condition. He tells Hong about a place with many children in need of rescue and asks him to help them. This is the same place where Wu himself was saved, and thanks to Wu, his younger self might just get rescued a year earlier than he was. The scene shifts to the following day. The students are taken to the training ground for outdoor practice. Hong is teaching fighting skills to some students, while the mages practice under Wu. Wu finds all the students quite lazy and approaches Yoo Hyeun, asking her to demonstrate her progress. He hopes to boost her morale with praise. However, Yoo Hyeun anxiously declines, saying she will show him once she has improved. Seeing Yoo Hyeun's reluctance, Wu insists on encouraging her, determined to offer support. However, as he reflects on his past efforts to motivate others, he recalls that his encouragement was often perceived negatively, with people mocking him for bragging about his own intelligence. Wu becomes lost in these memories. He remembers standing second in his school and receiving praise from Hong. Despite his achievement, his adoptive father found him disheartened, as Wu had hoped to be first. Hong had tried to comfort him, assuring Wu that he would be appreciated, even if he finished last. Wu also remembers how his adoptive father had given him the freedom to follow his own path. Turning back to Yoo Hyeun, Wu tells her to feel comfortable and showing her work when she is ready. He attempts to motivate Yoo Hyeun with encouraging words, telling her that she has the potential to become a great archmage, and that many world-renowned archmages were stubborn in their youth and disliked being disturbed. However, he receives no response and senses a strange aura. Suddenly, Yoo Hyeun bursts into tears and tells Wu he can check her work. Wu reassures her that it's okay to take her time, but Yoo Hyeun insists, admitting that she has been wrong all along. This revelation leaves Wu stunned, worrying if he made a mistake. He asks her and the other students to end their practice for the day. Yoo Hyeun runs off, crying, leaving Wu perplexed and anxious about what he might have done to upset her. Wu follows Hong as they leave the training ground, and the students bid them goodbye. Wu asks if their new residence is nearby, and Hong informs him that he has arranged for them to stay in a dormitory. Hong discusses with Wu the rising cases of child kidnapping, noting that newly awakened children are particularly targeted, and that these kidnappers often do not demand ransom. Hong then inquires if the place Wu mentioned is within the Ark Research Center. Wu responds with a question, wondering if Hong believes all the children at the Ark are kidnapped. Wu reminds Hong of his condition about rescuing the children, implying that Hong would also be involved in this effort. Hong tells Wu that he should understand he has already made significant concessions for him. Wu responds that he needs to find someone among those children, and is concerned about his safety. After some hesitation, Hong agrees, acknowledging that having a guide would be beneficial for him. Hong then asks Wu to wait, as he needs some time to assemble a team of reliable personnel for the operation. When Wu inquires about the trustworthiness of these individuals, Hong assures him that he is very serious about cases involving children and will ensure they are trustworthy. A new day dawns as Wu gazes out the window of a classroom. Yoo Hyeun appears as depressed as ever, while Wu diligently studies beside her. Wu feels a bit more cheerful, thanks to Hwijae, his admirer, who washes away his gloominess. The boy introduces a girl named Soon to his teacher. When Wu asks if they're on break, Hwijae remarks on the strange priorities of others, sacrificing their breaks voluntarily. He wonders if being able to sit stiffly for so long is part of being a mage. Studying even in breaks, now that is a magical ability I don't possess. Wu asks if Hwijae is indeed a swordsman, so he confirms it and expresses the wish to see his teacher's awesome sword. Wu explains that the principal forbade him from carrying it on school grounds for safety reasons, disappointing Hwijae. Thinking about the sword, Wu wonders if there's a young version of himself and another copy of his aunt's sword in this world. He is excited at the chance of getting his hands on another brilliant blade like it. The scene shifts to a yellow luxury car zooming in. A lady with glistening fair skin, wearing a white dress, exits the car. Peeking at her from afar, Woo is distraught seeing her here. The brunette shields herself from the sun with a black parasol. Archmage Kim Chae-min shocks the teacher in the blue tracksuit. Kim Chae-min's profile is shown on Woo's manhwa watch, revealing her cause of death as a fight with a siren. Kim shyly says she is happy to accept the teaching job, but she can only teach the basics. It appears her magic requires high aptitude, which she concludes the students do not possess. Hong mentions Yoo Hyeun's exceptional ancestry, but Kim dismisses her based on her lack of experience. She frowns at Hong, recalling her over for something unrelated to the arc, but he proudly points at the legendary teacher in a tracksuit. Kim instantly recognizes Woo as the guy on the rooftop who disappeared during the Myeongdong incident. Caught off guard by her reaction, Woo introduces himself as the mage student's teacher. Kim is surprised he is a mage since she saw him wielding a sword at Myeongdong. Hong proudly brags that Woo is even better than a mage, making Kim wonder if he possesses unique magic. Woo denies her theory, proudly claiming he teaches runes and is thankful for the golden opportunity to meet the Archmage herself. Kim tries to sugarcoat her words, but Woo bluntly blurts out her thoughts, saying she probably thinks runes are trash. With an innocent grin, he tells the flustered lady that a demonstration should change her mind. He tells the students to bring their runes outside, in the open field. Woo rates Jinwoo and Yoo Hyeun's runes, complimenting Yoo Hyeun and advising her to be more confident. Kim blankly stares at the runes, thinking they are a mess, but Woo devilishly grins at the final result. Placing the rune on the ground, Jinwoo activates it. A tornado of flame erupts from the sheet of paper, shocking Kim. Woo then asks Yoo Hyeun to show hers next. Kim's mouth is left agape, seeing the light magic materialize from the rune. She throws a tantrum, demanding to know how they create magic without her sensing any mana. To her chagrin, Woo congratulates his students for making runes even an archmage couldn't detect mana from. With what seems to be doodles in hand, Woo reveals a mana-concealing rune behind the trick. Impressed, Kim is engrossed in the marvelous rune, as Hong brags about Woo. With a menacing look, Kim grabs the old man's collar and demands she be enrolled as a student as well. Shigun offers up her salary for the classes, instantly cheering Hong up. Satisfied with seeing Woo's hand-drawn runes, Kim's spirits are lightened, as Hong gladly approves. Woo stares in frustration, wishing he could at least receive the salary the lady so readily gave up. A few days later, Woo visits one of the research facilities with Hong and a team of hunters. When Woo questions their skills, Hong reassures him and explains the plan: find the kidnapped children, block escape routes, and perhaps even capture higher up. When Woo asks if he has to do nearly everything, Hong laughs it off as an opportunity to improvise. A specialist hunter reports that he cannot detect any life or cameras inside the facility, including the basement. Woo finds this hard to believe and suggests they enter. To everyone's surprise, he slices the chains locking the entrance. Leading the team, Woo senses something is amiss, considering the children cannot be moved so quickly. He elaborates that a special environment is created for the experiments. As Hong and Kim look around, Woo enters a PIN code. Hong is annoyed at not getting complete details, so Woo explains that he must keep some secrets. In the elevator, Woo selects the 5th floor, which actually leads them to the basement. The door opens into a giant abandoned room. Woo warns the others not to use magic, as emergency protocol runes will cause an explosion upon detecting mana. As expected, Kim expresses strong admiration for the deadly ruins. Observing the lack of dust, Woo deduces the place was abandoned recently. He wonders what could have caused Ark to flee abruptly. Hong and Kim peek through a locked door, which Woo reveals to be the main research lab's entry. He expects to find the experimental subjects, the children. However, all they find are scattered furniture and toys. Kim frowns at the terrible facility, and Hong asks if damaging the place would not cause it to self-destruct. As soon as Woo confirms it, Hong smashes a glass window in rage, giving Kim a heart attack. Looking through the shattered window, Woo disdainfully commends the facility on its ingenious design. A scene from Woo's childhood at the Ark Research Facility is shown. He approaches a kid and asks what he's writing. The kid, diligently jotting in his diary, explains that his lawyer father ingrained in him the importance of evidence for cases. This kid wouldn't have many friends at school. Young Woo tells him to write about the lab chief abusing the children, but the kid refuses as it is a lie. As a loophole, Young Woo proposes writing that the chief hits people, making it technically true, as he does kick his staff occasionally. Far more cynical for a child, Woo proclaims himself a witness. The scene shifts to the present, where a blonde woman clicks her tongue in frustration. Surrounded by suited men acting like servants, she declares that coming here is a waste of time. She is Guild Day Seon's leader, Lee Mi-seon. Woo is surprised that Seon-yeon's aunt looks nearly identical to her in the future, while Hong reassures her. The center is not a waste of time. Mi-seon complains that there is no research data as promised. A subordinate informs the guild master that he's cleared the facility of explosives. Mi-seon indifferently thanks him and teases Hong for hiding something from her. Hong's grin widens, prompting Mi-seon to ask him what is wrong. He quietly glances at the timid teacher in a blue tracksuit behind him, but Mi-seon is unimpressed. Mi-seon orders some men to leave and only report if it is important. Hong asks Kim if the organization of evidence is complete, aggravating Mi-seon as she was told nothing was left. Hong reveals although no lab workers left behind evidence, he hands her a piece of paper. One of the kids, seemingly Hwijae's younger brother, left some notes behind. Woo stares at the blonde woman examining the note. She flips through the report exposing that the Mi-on-dong dungeon incident was maliciously executed. Mi-seon's jaw bursts open, shocked by the unbelievable news. It is further mentioned that everyone moved after the child heard the lab chief mention a dungeon in the Songpa district. The writers suspect that a child ran away. Thus 2 days pass. Soon-jin is hunched on the ground, making Woo curious why. He attempts to probe her, but the silent girl does not budge. Changing the subject, Woo asks why she has left Seon-yeon to fight Hyeun-wook alone. She just comments on how it is futile, and Woo agrees that Hyeun-wook is remarkably talented, while the others are subpar. Soon-jin then requests that Woo stop looking at her. Seeing her hidden sword, he immediately catches on to her plan. Out of nowhere, the silent girl lunges toward the unaware Hyeun-wook, allowing Seon-yeon to get a hit on him. Hyeun-wook curses at the cunning girl, who taunts him. Accused of cheating, Seon-yeon proudly claims that nothing can be expected in a dungeon. The cheeky swordsman provokes Hyeun-wook to switch his training partners. When he grumbles about having 2 opponents, the spar is interrupted by a black luxury car, confusing everyone. A gorgeous blonde woman steps out, asking how her little Seon-yeon is doing. She also compliments Soon-jin. While Seon-yeon expresses his displeasure at the child's treatment, Woo is shocked to see the silent girl blush, wondering who this woman is. Mi-seon is satisfied, leaving Soon-jin with Hong and teasing Seon-yeon to be more like her. Adding insult to injury, she compares his height with Hyeun-wook's, even offering to be a nice older sister if he joins her guild. Like a silver cross through a vampire's heart, Seon-yeon calls her too old to be an older sister. Everyone has made this mistake once, but this kid really is brave for doing it again. Mi-seon turns around and tells him that this attitude is why he can't get a girlfriend. The two enter a heated argument, shouting insults back and forth while Woo observes them. He remembers hearing that Mi-seon loved her nephew dearly, so he expected a more lovey-dovey type of relationship, but brushes it off as a strange way to express affection. Meanwhile, Hong announces that Mi-seon has brought food along and invites the students inside. Hong also calls Woo and Kim inside. Now sitting on a couch, Mi-seon reveals that she has bought the Songpa district dungeon. However, she also adds that the government is attempting to take over the Bonji-dong dungeon due to the Mi-on-dong incident. She explains that the price was low since the other guilds hesitated from bidding, assuming it to be a low-rank one. Hong asks why there was no public evaluation, so Mi-seon informs him that it was delayed due to the tragic dungeon break. Hong advises immediately tackling the Bonji-dong dungeon. Concerned, he asks Woo how his brother's journal entries should be interpreted. Woo turns his head in frustration, irked by the fact that he is clueless about something that never happened in his past. The next day arrives. Woo compliments his students on having learned cover and support runes already. As he announces his plan for the next rune, Kim immediately raises her hand, making Woo patiently smile in anticipation of the question. At the same time, sitting in the back is Lee Mi-seon. She looks at him with suspicion, despite finding him very attractive. Meanwhile, Kim passionately asks about how many runes Woo knows, as Mi-seon assesses their lack of skepticism about Woo's capabilities. Calling him master, Kim expresses her wish to know her teacher's full power, smiling wryly. Woo tells her that he's not a mage, and definitely not her master. This whole time, Mi-seon has been glaring daggers at him, thinking it is obvious that they should not trust someone from Arc Labs just because he saved a few lives. Sensing her death stare, everyone turns to look at the blonde woman, who plays it off as merely a habit. Drawing a symbol on the board, Woo reveals he will teach what he calls the Shadow Rune, smiling cheerfully. He remarks how simple it is, leaving the students speechless with his absurd statement. When Kim asks about its function, Woo tells them to find out practically. After some insistence, the students begin practicing the rune. A few moments later, Jin-woo is shocked at his accomplishment as Woo proves that it is far simpler than the mana cover rune. As if bullying, Woo jokingly taunts Jin-woo to master it quickly, since he doesn't have time to waste when there are many more runes to learn, making the bright student dejected. Now checking Stubby-yoon's rune, Woo deems it good enough and tells her to activate it. Mi-seon stares in disbelief as the girl begins to blur before her. Satisfied by the result, Woo grabs the rune paper, explaining how it merges the user with nearby shadows, dramatically concealing them in the dark. Crumpling up Soo-hyeon's work, Woo instructs her to think of potential uses for it. Like a bully, he villainously mocks her for not knowing, following up by saying that it is fine, since teaching her at her slow speed is his job. Woo's comedic act is interrupted by Mi-seon's curious question about the mana cover rune. Woo says that its name is quite self-explanatory and mentions using it during the Myeongdong incident. Mi-seon is surprised, noting she hadn't heard about it from Seong-yeon. She mentions that Hong kept shifting the conversation, leading her to avoid probing to prevent triggering her nephew's trauma. Then Hong looks at her with a guilty look, immediately facing the blonde lady's wrath for allegedly silencing her nephew. Now, sitting in a room alone, Hong explains the ancestry of Kim Chae-min and the Archmage lineage to Woo. Hong repeatedly asks Woo about its significance, while Woo keeps asking him why it concerns him so much. Finally, Woo admits his ignorance. Hong warns him that he will become a target for the mages in Arc because of his runes. Casually sipping his drink, Woo suggests using Kim Chae-min's name. This prompts Hong to strongly glare at the teacher and tell him to reflect on his answer, puzzling Woo about Hong's intention. Woo is surprised when Hong reveals that he did not silence the students. They did it on purpose, hoping their teacher would get the credit and go down in history books. Upon Hong's assurance that he will get Woo's name published, Woo's consciousness drowns in guilt. He recalls how the great French archmage Park Soo-hyeon and many others were angels who created runes for humanity's sake. However, the Hunter Agency made a fortune in royalty payments off the mage's efforts. Woo holds his head in silence, feeling bad for the artists, whose work was exploited for money by the agency, which gave them only peanuts as their share. At the same time, thoughts of how much the Hunters would benefit and not having to beg Lee Mi-seon for funds immediately wash away the remorse. Woo immediately perks up and accepts Hong's offer. Hong, though perplexed, suggests the two celebrate with a meal. The scene shifts to workers unloading furniture from a car. Hong stares in shock and complains to Mi-seon, who is reclined in her chair, for desecrating the holy school grounds. Glancing at Hong with repulsion, she tells him that calling such a place a school could get him reported. Hong counters that he is still working on getting a building. Mi-seon sighs, saying that the rough outdoors is bad for Soon-jin's skin, before savagely denying her nephew's existence. Woo observes the woman commanding her men to put everything in place orderly. Mi-seon merrily approaches him and openly offers him to use her company's developmental technology and asks for help anytime. Already being the proud owner of future Dae-seon technology, Woo holds his grin at her generous offer back. Extending her hand to him, the bewitching woman officially introduces herself to Woo as the master of the Dae-seon Guild. Mentioning how she assists Hunter Hong, the beautiful woman smiles and confesses her plan to help Woo as well. Woo smiles in self-satisfaction. Finally having caught the guild master's attention,